On this channel, we've looked at engines like the Toyota 2JZ and the Ford Barra, which are well known as two of the best gas-powered inline-six engines ever. But America actually has an inline-six engine of its own, which might actually be better than both the 2JZ and the Barra. In this video, we're going to take a deep dive into the GM Vortec 4200, and I'm going to tell you exactly what makes it such a special engine. And right off the bat, I'm sure you're asking, how the heck is it possible that America has this crazy good inline-six engine that's somehow better than the 2JZ or the Barra, and yet no one's talking about it? It's completely under the radar, and you've probably never even heard of it. I know it sounds kind of crazy that an engine this good could fly under the radar, especially on the internet where everyone seems to know everything. I'm looking at you, TikTok commenters. But seriously, it's true. The GM Vortec 4200 is a wolf in sheep's clothing, or a sheep in wolf's clothing. I don't even know anymore.
What?
Now, starting with the basics, the Vortec 4200 is part of GM's Atlas family, which includes their 3.5-liter inline 5 Vortec 3500 and the smaller 2.8-liter 4-cylinder Vortec 2800. Now, technically speaking, the Vortec 4200 is the GM LL8, but for the simplicity of this video, we're just going to call it the Vortec 4200 because, well, the GM LL8 is kind of just a lame name, and if this engine has any chance of being as good as a 2JZ or a Barra, a lame engine isn't going to do, so we're just going to call it the Vortec 4200. Now, this engine only ever really had one application, which was the GMT 360, a platform on which the Chevy Trailblazer, GMC Envoy, Buick Rainier, Oldsmobile Bravado, Isuzu Ascender, and Saab 97X were built on. So basically, the only thing this was ever used in is mid-sized SUVs that everyone loves to hate. Sorry to all the boomers and soccer moms out there, but no one really likes these cars. The design for the engine itself was actually pretty advanced for a GM engine of the time, with an all-aluminum construction, so an aluminum cylinder block and cylinder head with dual overhead camshafts, 4 valves per cylinder, coil-on plug ignition, and a pretty high compression ratio of 10:1. It also included variable camshaft timing on the exhaust side with GM's Vortec engineering, which really just means that the cylinder heads flow very well and help deliver a flat torque curve. Now, because it was only ever used in the GMT 360 platform, the Vortec 4200 had a pretty short life from 2002 to 2009 and was never followed up by anything. They quite literally just let the whole thing die. They let the engine series die and never followed it up with anything ever. Now, compared to something like the 2JZ or the Barra, the Vortec 4200 has more displacement than both and a much lighter aluminum cylinder block. Both the 2JZ and Barra could be had with either some form of VVT or VCT at some point in their lives, so that's not really a big pro for the Vortec engine. And all of that equals out to a pretty boring power output of 275 horsepower and 275 pound-feet of torque. Now, to be fair, that's not terrible for a naturally aspirated 4.2-liter SUV engine. As a matter of fact, that's actually pretty good for the time. So before you run to the comments saying that Americans don't know how to build engines and that this thing is super weak, makes no power, just wait a second. Wait until you hear about this twin-turbo variant that I'm about to talk about. Now, as I said, it's important to note that GM almost introduced a twin-turbo variant of the Vortec 4200 when they were designing the Trailblazer SS. You see, before they settled on shoving a 6-liter LS2 into the front of the Trailblazer, they experimented with the idea of leaving the 6-cylinder engine in it and simply strapping twin turbos to the side of it to get the power where they wanted. The changes that they made include, rather obviously, the aforementioned twin turbo system from Aerodyne, tuned to a mild 8.5 pounds of boost. They also added an air-to-water intercooler and an updated rotating assembly with a lower 8.5:1 compression ratio to help it from not exploding. This updated and pretty experimental package output an impressive 400 horsepower at 5,200 RPM and 400 pound-feet of torque at 2,500 RPM. Unfortunately, though, they scrapped this twin-turbo experimental variant and never tried to boost the Vortec 4200 again. Okay, so in stock form, the Vortec 4200 kind of seems like a potato. A workhorse of an engine, doesn't really make a whole lot of power. There were never any turbo variants other than the experimental one, so what exactly makes this engine so special? Now, that all begs the question, what makes the Toyota 2JZ and the Ford Barra worthy of being deemed as incredible and special engines? Both have pretty weak power outputs in stock form, and both are used in a variety of applications from sedans to sports cars. Well, what makes those engine specials is what they're capable of with modifications and what they can handle when pushed to the limits, both in terms of a stock engine power limit and a modified engine power limit. And that's exactly where you'll find the Vortec 4200 in the same company as the Ford Barra and the Toyota 2JZ. Sort of. Now, I won't lie, it's a little bit of a stretch to say that the Vortec 4200 is as capable as the Ford Barra or the Toyota 2JZ when pushed to the limits. But part of that is because very few people have actually put their hands on the Vortec 4200 and spent the time pushing them to the absolute limits. Now, because the Vortec is a much less popular engine than the other two, it's not exactly a fair fight to compare them in context of aftermarket performance. But we don't care if it's a fair fight because this is YouTube and there are basically no rules at all. Okay, on a more serious note, the first example of what this engine is capable of comes in a Baja truck. I know it seems a little weird, but just stick with me for a second. General Motors teamed up with Falconer, who is a specialty engine builder. With this partnership, they were able to put together a stroked out 5-liter version of this engine with a very impressive power output of 600 horsepower and 450 pound-feet of torque. The first race truck to use this 5-liter engine was the Vortec Trailblazer that ran in the Baja 500 and Baja 1000 off-road races all the way back in the year 2000. Crazy to think that was 24 years ago. God, I'm old. Now, unfortunately, the Vortec Trailblazer had a pretty short career and only competed in those 2 Baja races before retiring, but that wasn't the end of the engine. The second appearance of this 5-liter beast comes at Pikes Peak, one of the most dangerous races in the world, at least before they paved the entire thing. Now, this came in the form of the GMZ Envoy race truck, which was built by the same team that put together the Trailblazer Baja truck. And pretty surprisingly, it took home the overall win for the 2000 Pikes Peaks hill climb. Then we saw this engine used one more time in the Vortec Trailblazer in the Best of the Desert Nevada race of 2000. And in this event, it managed to take home the win for the trick truck class. So although the Vortec 4200 had a pretty short racing career with GM's partnership with Falconer and then other race teams, it did really well. It won in multiple different races and multiple different kinds of races, which is kind of a testament to how adaptable and usable this engine is in a lot of different applications. Now, in terms of aftermarket performance, engines like the 2JZ and the Barra are well known for making ridiculous amounts of power on a completely stock engine, with the 2JZ taking the win because the Barra's head bolts have to be swapped in order for it to withstand massively increased boost levels. Now, if we take a look at the Vortec engine, it's certainly not as impressive as the 2JZ, but still pretty good, with examples floating around on the internet of these engines making upwards of 800 wheel horsepower on an internally stock engine, but rather obviously with forced induction added to the equation. Now, as far as I can tell from looking around on the internet, there are no examples of the Vortec 4200 having a billet block. So there's no examples of these engines making 2, 3, 4,000 horsepower like you can find with the Barra and the 2JZ using their stock architecture with a billet block. But that being said, we have seen examples of the Vortec 4200 with a built bottom end and a stock block making upwards of 1,000 wheel horsepower, so it's still pretty impressive to say the least. Again though, it's not really near the numbers that we've seen out of the world record 2JZ and Barra engines, but it's still very impressive, especially considering how few people are actually pushing these engines to the limits. Now, one thing I do want to mention, because I think it's massively important to this discussion, is how dirt cheap Vortec 4200 engines are compared to the 2JZ and compared to the Barra, at least here in the States. If you hop over on eBay and look at engine prices, we'll generally see 2JZ GE engines floating around $2,000, with the 2JZ GTE engines closer to $6,000. If we look at the Barra engine, it's generally $2,000 to $4,000 for a complete engine. But if we look at the Vortec 4200, you can find plenty of examples of them under $1,000, with some of them as low as $250 plus shipping. Now, with all that money saved, you can just go ahead and dump it into a forced induction system of some sort, whether you want to go turbo or supercharged, doesn't really matter, which makes the Vortec 4200 a much more financially feasible inline 6 option for those of you out there that don't want to blow a crazy amount of money on a 2JZ or a Barra. So will we ever see the Vortec engine reach the potential of the Toyota 2JZ or the Ford Barra? Maybe, but probably not. It just doesn't have the same amount of aftermarket parts development, and it's an engine that was only used in applications that everyone loves to hate. So is it fair to call this the American 2JZ? I'd say yes. It's versatile, adaptable, decently lightweight thanks to being all aluminum, has more displacement than both the Barra and the 2JZ, it's capable of making a bunch of power, and it's dirt cheap to buy here in the States. Does it really compare to the 2JZ or the Barra in terms of aftermarket performance? No, absolutely not. But go ahead and let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. While you're down there, smash the thumbs up button if you enjoyed the video, get subscribed so you don't miss out on future videos, check out some of the other stuff on the channel. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, we post a lot on everywhere, and I'll see you guys in the next one.